Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Obligations of Memory podcast from the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group. I'm Jeffrey Geisler, founder, and with me today from Israel is Yifat Cohen Meir, and I am so happy to have Yifat. Yifat and I have become friends. Yifat has done a program with me through one of our live programs, and you can find that on the YouTube channel. So welcome, Yifat, coming from Israel.
Hi, and thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. And really, I want to start this interview the same way I do most of my interviews, is to give you an opportunity, just a short opportunity to talk about your parents, which I know are both survivors, where they were before the war, what was their camp experience, but we're going to keep that literally to a short bit, and then we'll move on. So take it away.
Okay. Both my parents are originally from Germany. My father was born in Szczecin, which is now Poland and the north of Germany. But with the years, he was born in 1929, end of it. And with years of persecution and all that, the family moved around, and eventually he arrived to Berlin in 1939. And he'd been there until 1943. And then with his mother, his father left to England a while before that, and in 39, and was supposed to take them out as well, but the war broke. So my father and his mother were left in Berlin, and they were there for a few years until they couldn't stay there anymore, and they were sent with a transport number 39 to Auschwitz. They didn't know where to the east, but that was Auschwitz. Arriving there, both of them separated at arrival. My grandmother went to Birkenau and my father to Auschwitz I with a men camp. And he was just 13 and a half, which was usually boys under 15 were sent to death at arrival. But he was tall and strong because in those years in Berlin, as a Jew, he didn't go to school since 42 and a bit before, and he worked in a cemetery, so he was a strong guy, tall guy, very tall guy. He was 1.80 meters, so he was quite a tall guy, and that saved his life because when he arrived, he looked older. No one just put him with the men groups, and once they found out his age, they just left him there. So he was one of the youngest to be known at Auschwitz I. He was part of a special project called the Bricklaying School, which was meant to young teenagers from 15 to 20. And as far as we know, he was one of the second or so youngest to be there, known to be there at that stage. And he spent 22 months in most of the time in Auschwitz I. And when Auschwitz was evacuated in January 45, he was evacuated to Gross Rosen and then to Buchenwald. And he was liberated from Buchenwald in April 45 by the age of 15 and a half.
When did you say that he went into Auschwitz?
In June 43. And he left, he was liberated in April 45, so that's 22 months. And the time of liberation, it took time until all survivors were there, and he was spending there another 2 months until he was moving to Switzerland for recovery. But in those 2 months, he was too weak to walk, and he made a very unique project, drawing his life in the camps in over 80 drawings, miniature drawings, very informative. And that became his legacy. Those drawings, very descriptive, very accurate, with facts, very factual, and this is a very valuable testimony that exists up to this day. And then he went to Switzerland for recovery, and they found his father, and he joined his father into England, and then he finished up his studies. He had to catch all the gap of studying all those years. He didn't go to school, so he catch up very, very quickly. And then by the age of 20, he also, after graduating from school, he decided to become an engineer. He comes from a family of doctors. His father, his grandfather were doctors, and they all wanted him. I mean, his father wanted to be a doctor, but he could not bear the sight of blood, and he couldn't do that. But since very early childhood, he was very into mechanic stuff, and he was like a boy engineer since very early childhood. So he decided he wanted to do that, and he became a building engineer. He wanted to be an architect, but they couldn't afford those studies. So he became a building engineer. But that was just amazing closure, because at the age of 20, he decided he really wants to go to be part of the new Jewish land, to immigrate to Israel. His father did not want that. He didn't approve that. And so my father had to kind of get out of England very quickly. Otherwise, he would be recruited to the army in England, and he wanted to take part in the building of the new state. So he arrived to Israel.
When was that? Just help me again. When was that?
1950.
Okay,
in
so
1950 he arrived.
The war was over.
Oh yeah, the war was over in 45. Oh, you mean the Independence War of Israel?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, just after that. In 1950 he arrived to Israel, immediately was recruited to the Jewish Agency, and became an engineer and taking part of building Israel from the north to Eilat, and all over Israel. And that was very symbolic, because the same boy who was trained to be a bricklayer and build the Nazi war or the Reich state or empire was supposed to be dead during that. And he survived that, not just surviving it, just he became an engineer and took part of building the Jewish land. So that was very symbolic. And also he recruited to the army. He became an officer in a very special unit of engineering, fighting engineering. So he was helping also with the army. He fought all of Israel, other wars, not the first one, but all the others. He took part there as well. And yeah, his testimony has a whole story. I don't know if you want me to go into that now, but
we want to. Let me bring the audience in. You can actually hear the whole testimony in the program that Yifat presented at the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group on the YouTube channel. He has written a book called The Boy Who Drew Auschwitz, which was the name of the program. So I would want you to go to the YouTube channel, and you can literally get all of that detail. I want to take you a little bit back to how your father met your mother, and maybe we can hear a little bit about that story as well.
Yeah. So yeah, just to So my mother, she was born in Berlin in 1935. So she was a bit younger, and her family, they wanted to move out of Germany by 38, 39, and they had few plans, but some of them did not work out. So there was a very short time opportunity to send kids on a kinder transport. And this is less known transport, not to England. Her transport was to Sweden. So they had to make a decision, and because they knew they're gonna try to get to Switzerland and join some other members of the family. So they decided that she was not even 4 yet. She and one of her elder brothers, he was 13, they were sent to Sweden. And her elder brother, he was 15, he got to Israel. And her parents ran away. They managed to escape for 1 year through Switzerland and France, but they were, I forgot the word for that. I mean, there were people told about them. I forgot the word. They were exposed and sent to to France and Displace camp and to Auschwitz, and both perished in Auschwitz. And I didn't mention my grandmother, my father's mother, perished in Auschwitz. She didn't survive the camps. So that's her family story, and she was adopted by Swedish Jewish family. First, no, she was just raised by them, and then when it was clear that her parents did not survive the war, she was adopted by that family and grew up in Sweden. And once she was in her 20s, she also decided that her real home is Israel. And she came in earlier, but then she thought she should, to contribute something to the country, she should study something useful. So she checked what is needed in Israel, and she went back to Sweden. She studied, she became, she was working with special education kids. She was a therapist, and she came to Israel with a profession a bit later. And then she met my father in Haifa. Both came to Haifa, and they had common friends. And they met and got married in 1963, and got 3 children. My sister was born in 1965, my brother in 1967, and I was born, I'm the youngest, I was born in 1971. So
are all your sisters and all your siblings living in Israel?
Well, my brother passed away.
Wow.
That's a whole story. He was in a very special unit in the army, and he got wounded in the army. And 20 years later, he died from that disease. And so that was another story. It's very connected, but yeah, and he passed away, and his family has 3 daughters and a wife with 3 daughters. Yeah, we are very tight together. We all live in Israel, and this is also part of I believe, the family legacy. I don't think any of us would think otherwise. We are all very attached to Israel. And my sister, we all have 3 kids, each of us. So my parents had 9 grandchildren and 1 great granddaughter. So my niece, my sister, she's a granny already. So
let's talk a little bit about how you grew up. You grew up in a household with your parents, and there's some things that I know you want to tell us about that. And then I want to ask you, because I'm very interested because of my own personal situation around intergenerational trauma, I would like to know from your perspective how it was to grow up in your home of survivors.
Okay. But can you remind me the first one? I just forgot what the first.
Should I relate for you to tell me a little bit about your growing up with your parents? I know about your mother, so you want to let people know about your relationship with your mother and her husband, your father. So the divorce. So you can mention that as well.
Well, my parents, yeah, they're both alive. My mother is 86, and my father is 92. And very special lives, both of them. And people ask us, how it affected you to grow up in a house, 2nd generation. By the way, we're quite young to be 2nd generation. My father was a young boy, so most survivors from the camps were older. He's uniquely young. And I was born when quite late in their life, so relatively late. So I was around my friends were, I don't think any of them were 2nd generation, maybe 3rd generation. So that was unique, actually. Yeah, well, you asked about the trauma, and I would say, yeah, part of the story of the Holocaust has the part of the trauma, but it also has the part of the strength of it. Or I don't know how the right way to say it, but yeah, there's a part of the trauma and the part that make you much stronger person.
Let's break it down. Tell us about the strength. Why do you feel that the Holocaust gave you strength? And then we'll talk about the trauma. So let's do the positive first.
The positive first. Well, I would do the trauma first, because I think that it's different, because also, I mean, I can talk so much about that, because there's so many research that's been done lately about the second and third generation and the effect of being that from our parents. And I quite understood the two main differences between Holocaust survivors, because their story, what they went through, has lots of effect, what the effect will be to the next generations. So the one who had the trauma was bigger, and not just, I mean, everyone had the trauma, but it was a huge change between people who were passively into the trauma and the one who's been active into the trauma. The effect is different on those survivors, and the effect on the next generation is different.
How do you define active and passive?
Well, passive would be the one who were children, who were hidden, who were sent away. Other people had to make decisions for them, and they were less. They had less ability to affect what happened to them. They were more passive into the events.
Got it.
And
the opposite is the ones that were in the camp.
And the one who had the ability to be active, and it was just related to age. I mean, there were children who did things, were more active, or ran away to the forest, or were being part of the partisans, or even the ghettos. They had also roles, even if they were younger, and or people who children who immigrated and made their own decision to move around. And of course, the amount of family members that you lost has also an effect. And what happened to you during the war and after. I mean, so many things affect the way you come out of the
So can I hear from you how you had a strength and give us a story about it, and how you felt trauma with the story, so we can be more.
So it's all combined. It's all combined. So my mother, she was young and she was sent away, and her trauma is a bit different. She didn't experience the Holocaust physically, but she was sent away from her parents at the age of 3 to a family not for a permanent time. She knew that it's not clear. Since very early age, she knew that life is not very clear, and that has effect, of course. And my father went to all those years of war more or less on his own. Since the age of 9, his father left. His mother was very busy working and surviving, and he had to take care of himself. And he was a very independent person since very early age, and that affects his way of life, of course, and the way he went through all those events.
How did those events affect you and your children?
So my father, he was separating his private present life from his past. So not just that he didn't speak about his events when we were young, his testimony, his written and drawn testimony, his drawn testimony was not known until the 80s. It was in a safe in my grandfather's safe in England, and not known. Just in 85, he donated it to Yad Vashem, and only later they became known. But his book, The Boy Who Drew Auschwitz, was it's the latest version from last year, but his book was published in other names before that, his original book, and the first one was published in 58. So his testimony was out there, but under a pseudonym, and the pseudonym is Thomas Geves. And very interesting, when my father was 16 arriving to England, journalists started to ask him questions, and he didn't want his friends from his present life to know of his past from very, very soon. It's a topic for a whole new conversation, why, and what happened to Holocaust survivors after the war in the society in different countries. He went through England and then went through Israel, and the reaction to survivors was a very interesting thing to talk about in maybe some other time. But anyway, he understood that he has to separate his life from the past and present in order to go on with life and start a new page, start a new future. He had to put his wartime life in a balloon or in a different world. And most interestingly, many people did that. Many Holocaust survivors did that, the separation. But most of them change their names into new names and start a new future with new names. My father kept his original name and gave his testimony life, or his life through the Nazi regime and the war, a pseudonym. And I find it very interesting, and I find it very significant to his character, because he was a very strong character since childhood, and also going through all those events in the camps. In his testimony, if you read the testimony, you can see the way he went through those events and how he actually grew up into those very harsh times to become a very special person. Although he was surrounded with so much negativity, he became such a positive person. And he felt, okay, once he was free from camps and being 15 and a half, almost 16 then, and he felt, now I'm becoming a grown up, and it's into my hands to decide what kind of person I'm going to be and what is my contribution to the new world. So he kept his name, original name.
So when you were growing up, did you know that your parents were Holocaust survivors?
Well, yes, we knew, because we knew we don't have grandparents. We did have grandparents, but they were not our not original grandparents. So my father, his father remarried after the war and after his mother perished. So he remarried, and his new wife became our granny. She was our grandmother, and of course we knew the story quite early, and also we knew she's a granny, but she's not his mother. So quite early we understood that. And also my mother, we had our grandpas, we call them mormor and morfar, that's the grandparents in Swedish. And they came every year in Passover for a week. And we had connection when we knew they were not her real parents, because we also have an aunt and an uncle from the adoptive family. So we knew the family story. And also I have an aunt, half an aunt from my father's side. So we knew the family origins, but my father never talked about his experiences. Also, he has the number on his arm as an Auschwitz survivor. So that was quite clear to everyone, but no one, including his friends and co-workers and so on, no one knew his real story. And no one knew that he's Thomas Geves. That you knew he was a survivor, but didn't know he wrote a book and didn't know about his drawings. And my mother knew, and just very, very few friends. And we knew there is a book when we were a bit older. I don't remember exactly when. And I read the book for the first time when I was just 21. And the book was written in English, and I'm not a native speaker. So my English was not good enough to read the book. But when I was 21, I went to England, and with a dictionary, there were no Google Translate those days. So with a dictionary, I started to go through my father's first book from 58. And I read it. I couldn't understand everything, but I vaguely knew the story. But in the last...
So before you go there, I want to come back to your family story. So
yeah,
as we're getting close to the end of this interview, we may do another one, but so tell us a little bit how you met your husband, and tell us about your family.
Oh, I met my husband through the youth movement, and it was many years ago, 35 years ago. We have 3 children, and we lived for a while in our family house, but it was sold. So that was very special for me to live where I grew up and raise my children in the same house, but it's not there anymore. And I just want to go just for a moment back, because I didn't really answer your question about how it affected our lives. Mm-hmm. And I combine that with your question now, because it affects everyone's life, also our children's life. And first of all, the way we treat life is different. I mean, we appreciate life. Also, losing my brother was part of that, but losing family, most of our family took part, very active part in our life. But we took it to the positive way, meaning that we appreciate life, we adore life, and indoor life, you say, you really, it's really valuable to us, not just our lives, everyone's life. And we are very, in various ways, we are all very activists, social activists, and we take part of doing everything we can to create a better world, a better society. We're very attached to Israel, as I said, and we're very active here in social.
And how old are your
active.
children?
My children?
Yeah.
My eldest daughter, she's almost 25, very soon. And my son is 20, and my youngest daughter, she's 15.
Okay. And so how would, if I asked them through their point of view, how would they think their parents have managed through being a child of the Holocaust?
My husband, his father also came from Romania, and they also went through the process, some of the Holocaust, but they're not really survivors. He was younger. So it's just my side, but it's a fact. They have each of our, I would say all the grandchildren, not just my children or my brothers and sisters' children, they have those sensitivities. For instance, talking about the Holocaust or going to Poland. In Israel, teenagers go in high school and they can go to Poland. It's quite a thing to do. And some of our children could not do that. It was too sensitive for them to do that. And some of them felt very important to do that, for instance. And another example is all of them, their army service had lots of meaning for them. And they chose to do things, very, very significant things in the army, various things. But also many of them had the opportunity to talk to their soldiers, the one who'd been officers, to talk to them. They take officers to Yad Vashem, and they were talking about their grandfather's experience, and they feel very proud to do that. And the ones who went to Poland talked about their father's, the family experience, and they feel attached to it. And nowadays, when my father's testimony is very active and they hear it more and more, some of them took the testimony to their own school, to their friends, to the friends in school, and some of them felt it's too much to talk about that to their friends. So they're very different. Mm-hmm. But they all have some kind of relationship to the topic and to the issue of the Holocaust, not just because it's our private family history. As Israelis, it's part of our DNA, not just the private DNA, also the national DNA to all Israelis has something to do with the Holocaust. It affects everyone here. So
I started to ask during this interview with second gens that I'm interviewing, my parents always had sayings growing up. I had to turn off the lights. My father would say, do we own stock in the PP&L company, which is the electric company? Or because I wasn't eating and I was a really bad eater, my mom said, their children would be dying for this food in China. And so I always would say, well, let's just start digging and I can dig a tunnel to China and give it to them. So are there any sayings that your father and mother that you can remember and that you're saying to your children?
Not of that kind. Actually, I think we felt those things even without them being said. And the way we cope with difficulties in life, challenges in life, without they didn't say anything. It just reflect to our, my brother, he went through very hard times, and he wrote a blog, an amazing blog. And he wrote there many times, how my father is an inspiration to deal with difficulties in life and challenges and not to give up. And if he survived what he survived and never gave up, so all our children say that, when time of difficulties, like in the army service or other places, when you're very cold or okay, it's freezing cold, and you say, well, my grandfather or my father went through the snow of Poland without proper shoes and thin clothes on him. It goes through your mind. You can't avoid it without anyone saying anything. It's just part of us. So yeah, it affects. And the one story was that, I was very tall as well. And as a girl, I was ashamed of that because I was always a head taller than my friends. And when I was about 12 or so, I started gradually going bent a little bit, just to be at the size of my friends. And one day my mother said, she told me the story of my father. She said, you should be proud of your height. And that height actually saved your father's life. And she told me the story of my father, that how he arrived and he was sent to be with a man, and he tried to fix it. He went to SS officers and said, you have a mistake, I'm much younger, but he let him go. And actually that saved his life. So he said, you should be proud with your height. It's a matter of pride in the family. And also my father, when he arrived to Auschwitz, he was 13. And when he got his number, the tattoo number, first thing he did, he looked at his number, he added up the numbers, and it added up to be 13. And he wondered whether that would be a lucky number. And apparently it was. And 13 became kind of a lucky number in the family. Both my parents has things with 13, and also in our family, we went on with that number. We got married on the 13th and so on. So you have lots of little stories and big stories that goes, but I feel most of them are in a positive way, in a strengthening way. And we keep on doing, trying to dig out the good of those experiences. There's a huge philosophy of my life. You can't change what happened. And it's very sad and traumatic. But if we take the past and we do something about it, we learn from it and we do something about it, and we do anything we can to change the present and the future to be better, I believe that's our way to respect our grandparents and parents and ancestors, other family members, whoever perished, also the children who perished, everyone who perished in those horrible circumstances. Is our role as a next generation to make a significant life and do anything we can. It's our role to avoid those things to happen and respect other people.
So speaking of roles, what are you doing today with your career that is following in the footsteps?
Yeah, it's another huge topic, but I'm a social activist in various ways. I'm a social worker and work with families and other things, a few other professions as well. But around COVID, I couldn't go on doing what I usually do. So at the same time, we had the Charlie Ingerfield, who found my father's testimony. He started a process in helping us to reproduce my father's testimony. And I was a connection person, but I became very active in that. And actually, it's the last 2 years, or almost 3 years now, that is my main role in main occupation. We republished my father's testimony. I went through his testimony, being a grown-up now. Now I know his testimony in a very different way than the first time I read it. I understand the importance of this testimony, the uniqueness of this testimony. And I feel that my life mission, just to make sure present and future is better, that we do anything we can to rise up everyone who needs to be held up and support everyone, and to really be active toward peace and unity between people. So dealing with that, I didn't think it would connect, but I understand every day that I understand more about my father's testimony, and I meet people like you and other projects. I was very blessed and lucky to meet. Every day I meet new people, and I understand that actually, especially after COVID times, that we wake up, humankind wakes up and say, okay, we can't afford living in the dark past. There's no room anymore to the dark past. And we see how different it could be. And once we unite, we are one humankind. I mean, it's ridiculous actually to fight. And, war now in Ukraine, it looks so much out of the frame. And I wish more people would do more to stop it. But I think we might need another reminder how awful it is and how important it is that we won't stand aside and we do everything we can. I know Israel do a lot Many people do a lot around the world. And I hope, I feel it's so everything connected. So I'm privileged to have this testimony as part of a passage I've done all my life, but now it's all the dots connected.
Yeah, and I, again, want everyone to listen to the recording of The Boy Who Drew Auschwitz on the YouTube channel. Yifat has been the facilitator of that testimony. It was beautiful and emotional and teary-eyed at times for me. We share many similar things. My grandfather on my mother's side was in Auschwitz in 1944 in May. So there is a chance that there is a possibility that you knew your father, much older. But I really find it to be so enjoyable to meet you. And one thing that COVID did was to enable this technology that I could actually touch you and hear from you and become friends with you. And we've never met physically, but we've always had this connection, which is beautiful. So I want to thank you for participating in and being a pioneer, so to speak, in the Obligations of Memory podcast. And I wish you and Thomas well and your family, and thank you for participating here today.
I want to thank you so much for the opportunity and for giving me the stage for the second time now, and for your amazing project. And I do believe COVID had their own effect that people do those special things more and more, and the ability to connect with each other, as you say, and become really one world of unity of people. And thank you for your part in that. And thank you for, I feel privileged to be here. And thank you so much for listening.